Welcome, 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 Housers, to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite. Sometimes I actually forget to introduce myself. Thanks for listening in today. We have a fabulous podcast for you that's going to talk about some great work happening in York Region with social service agencies and the York Regional Police. Before we get to that, introduction conversation, I want to tell you a little bit about my organization, Blue Door. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. We do all sorts of different things supporting vulnerable people across the regions of York, Peel, and Durham. We have a construction social enterprise called Construct that launches people into the trades to meaningful and well-paying work that lifts them out of poverty, and a construction arm to that actually brings in revenue that can then help Blue Door do things like build affordable, deeply affordable housing and add different positions that support the people that we help day to day. As well, we do all sorts of housing programs across Durham and York, from emergency housing to transitional or supportive housing for different populations, for seniors, for men, for families, for youth, for newcomers, for 2S LGBTQ plus youth, and more. Plus, we do some health supports with our partners across the region. We have a health hub. It's really cool with a nurse, and we do some in-reach work with a hospital to make sure no one's discharged into homelessness, and much more. Check us out. You can use that QR code on your screen. Just scan that or go to bluedoor.ca. We do this podcast in partnership with an incredibly talented group of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. They are a national organization that do everything from advocacy. They're doing a lot of work right now. There's some awful stuff happening, unfortunately, in Edmonton with a teardown of encampments and in freezing cold weather where people don't have safe and affordable and warm places to go, and they're lending their ear and time and support to that to make sure, in hopes that that's done differently. But they have the ear of the government. They do a lot of great advocacy work. They speak to the government around solutions and tangible solutions. Tim Richter, their CEO, has spoken many times on television and at different conferences and in different times when he has that they pull them into government pieces around moving forward and trying to prevent and end homelessness. They also do a lot of training. If you want to become a Built for Zero community, and you should try and become a Built for Zero community, they can help you out. So check out all the work they do. I'm not doing it justice. At caeh.ca, they're a wonderful organization, a small group of people with huge impact. So check them out. Wow, we have a great podcast today. About almost 10 years ago, probably just over 10 years ago, actually, a group in York Region of emergency housing providers got together with the York Regional Police and said, what can we put together that might, there's a lot of interaction. Sometimes we need to call the police for support with some of our clients. Sometimes the police might be looking for missing people, or something's going on where that person might be residing within those emergency housing providers or their locations. How do we provide clarity? How do we simplify things? How do we make it less gray for those interactions? And they got together, and it took a while. It took a couple of years, but they came up with a memorandum of understanding that both police and staff could actually flip through and had access to, that would kind of underline, here's what people can ask for, here's what your responsibility is, here's what the police's responsibility is, here's why they might be asking this, here's why the shelters may not be able to give out that information. And it got us to an understanding. It was a wonderful document, and everyone signed on, and it really provided that clarity. And that was signed off in 2014. Now, as time kind of went on, and new staff came on, both with the police and new leadership and social services as well, that document fell to the side. And recently we were working with York Regional Police, chatting about this. They knew of it, and we said it was time to dust that off, renew it. So Alex Cheng and Tom Muir, through their leadership, bringing partners together across the region, did just that over the past year. There's some legislation changes, and not only were there emergency housing providers, shelter providers involved, now they brought on different services that were providing day services, seasonal shelters, that kind of thing. So it grew really to the number of individuals and organizations that were involved in this MOU. We talk all about how that came around, the history around it. We talk about Alex and Tom, who both have really interesting journeys into the work that they're doing. Of course, neither really saw themselves when they were little going into the work that they were doing. Tom actually talks about how he was heavily involved in social services, the Canadian Mental Health Association with brain injury, that type of work, and never really thought of policing until later on and got into that, and how that background has really helped inform him in the work that he's done with York Regional Police. So we talk about their journeys, we talk about the history of the MOU, we talk about some of the pieces that it addresses, why it's important, and what needs to happen moving forward. Because now you have a document and you have a resource, but training staff and getting them up to speed and making sure that's a consistent thing is going to be the key moving forward. And they put it out there for communities. Hey, if you want to, like, this was a lot of work, you don't have to start from scratch. They will willingly give you this document to tweak and see if you can make it work in your community too. It's a great resource, and it's a great example of how the police and community groups can work together to serve our most vulnerable. A wonderful podcast with two great leaders. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's go to that conversation now. Tom and Alex, thanks so much for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedules to join us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having us, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Guys, we're going to talk about the great work that you and the community have been doing together around this very kind of special project that you put together. But before we get going, we have a standard question that we ask everyone who joins the pod. And Alex, you have a bit of an advantage because you've answered this before on the podcast. So you know what? I'm going to switch it up. I was going to start with you. I'm going to go with Tom first. And Tom, just right off the bat, we know you're not in housing, but this is a personal thing, and so there's no right or wrong answer. The question is, what does home mean to you? So we'll go to you and then go to Alex after.
Yeah, so thinking about that, I took a second to kind of mull that over. To me, I looked at that word over the span of my life. From childhood, I thought about playing tag and the notion of being home free and what that meant. And every time I thought about the word, I thought of a feeling, and that feeling was um, safety, a feeling of security, and the ability to just relax. And then when I moved on to kind of middle life, or when I was a young man going off to school, to university, living overseas, no matter where I was at the time, there was still this notion of home, going back home for the holidays. And I really, now that I'm older, I have my own family, my children, my wife, I want to be able to provide that home to them. And I think really you need to have a home to be able to explore and think of where you want to go in life. You want to not have to worry about that. So in order for you to feel ready to jump to the next stages of life, I think you need to have that home. I hope that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Thank you so much for that, Alex.
Wow, I have a lot to. Wait, first of all, this is the second time that I've answered this question. But so I was pondering this question myself before the podcast, and I heard Tom with his answer. I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I was thinking about this time around too. Is that it is more than just a roof over your head, right? I mean, for the most part, I can say that I've had a privileged upbringing, but as I also think about my upbringing, my life from childhood into adulthood, I think it means a sense of permanency, stability, privacy, right? It's almost like a place where you can feel that you are safe to detach from everything else around you. And for the most part, that means like expectations or judgments, right? It's something that allows for some grounding. And I suppose I guess home is also the place where you have your support network, your immediate family. This is a home is a place that you open up so that you have your friends and colleagues come and spend time with you. Now I'm a parent and I look at my 8-year-old and I get this feeling when I go and pick him up from school every day and I see what home means through his eyes as well, right? Home is mom and dad and a sense of comfort and security. What would it be like if he didn't have home to go to every day? So I think that's what home kind of means to me. And I echo what Tom said. Is like you can't really do much. Or you can't really have a lot of hopes if you don't really have that sense of permanency and that sense of home.
Absolutely. Well said, Alex. It starts with home all the time. And Alex, we're going to segue into our next question to talk about a bit of our journey. I know you have a fascinating life journey, having grown up a little bit in Panama. And I remember you've fascinated me with some stories about you were there during the conflict and through the eyes of a child, how it seemed different, making your way to Canada, the differences here, and then for the last what around 15, 20 years in our social sector. Can you wind us through as much as you're comfortable your journey into the sector?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, my journey certainly been a long journey of self-discovery, I think, right? As you mentioned, I am an immigrant myself. My parents wanted a better life for myself and my family, so I did come here when I was, I think, 12 at the time. Right, went through uh, the school system in Panama, then here in Canada. But whenever you're displaced, and this goes back to the sense of a home. I mean, when I look back at, yes, I had a privileged upbringing, but my parents weren't always around. Right, and I lived mostly with my siblings, and I think that that in itself kind of played a part in what came to be for me afterwards. And like some perhaps in this field, I didn't necessarily plan on social services as a destination, but it was fate, serendipity, personal circumstances that kind of led me here, right? And I think all those circumstances kind of led to maybe it's my personality as well, but as a young adult, and sometimes even now, I can probably admit to it too, that I struggle with anxiety and depression. And having had to kind of navigate through that, it kind of led me to discover a whole new world of support and services that, as when I was growing up, didn't even know it existed. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to be on the other side, that I want to be one of the folks that were providing kind of those supports. So, as you said, for the last 20 years or so, I've had different roles, mostly in mental health, addictions, homelessness. I spent the last 10 years at Blue Door, mostly in leadership roles, not necessarily providing the same type of direct service as often anymore, but using the knowledge and experience and the voice that I've acquired to kind of influence service delivery, programming, and supporting our staff or stakeholders in ensuring that we provide a better place, or we provide better housing options for folks that are struggling.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thanks for sharing the journey, and thanks for being so open too about the mental health challenges as well. You're absolutely right. I'm a little older than you, but with growing up, the stigma attached to mental health, no one wanted to say, share those types of feelings because you were stigmatized as crazy, right? And it was really not something you talked about. Thankfully, although we have a long way to go, it has changed over time, and we're very thankful to have you leading the way out Blue Door. I mean, under your leadership, the changes in the last 10 years have been just incredible and really been impactful in our community. So thanks for that. Detective Tom, tell us about your journey. Was policing early on in your thoughts? Is it something you just kind of came into? Walk us through it.
Well, it's great hearing Alex's story. I knew a little bit about Alex, but I think there are some parallels between Alex and I. I never grew up wanting to be a police officer. There was no police in my family, friends, or anything like that. I went to university, wanted to travel afterwards. My wife and I moved to Japan for a couple of years, came back to Canada, and my wife went to teachers college, and I actually got into social service work. So I started working in acquired brain injury down in Niagara region. Eventually moved up to this area. My wife is a teacher. She's gotten a position up here in Simcoe County, and I came with her, obviously, and I got into the Simcoe County District School Board for about a year, and then eventually migrated over to the Canadian Mental Health Association, and I was a case manager there in Barrie for a number of years. Still no inkling that I would ever become a police officer. And then I was fortunate enough to work with a couple of retired police officers that were working for CMHA. One was OPP, the other one was Barrie City. And they got to know me, and they both kept telling me, Tom, you should really consider it. And I never had an interest. Like most people, I watched policing on through the lens of media, through TV shows, through movies. I really didn't know what it was really truly about. It was never humanized really to me at all. I didn't know who was working there. Just like you, I had a police car behind me when I was driving. I was nervous, so I never was really drawn to it. But what happened is I went out for a ride along with an OPP officer a couple of times. So I was out for a 12-hour shift with him in his police car, and I fell in love with it. And I realized that a lot of the things I was doing at CMHA were the same things that officer was doing, except with a uniform on. And it really kind of broke down the walls of what truly goes on in policing. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to give this a shot. I fell in love with the idea, and I started here in 2006. So I've been here about 18 years now, and I've had an opportunity to work in a bunch of different capacities. Uniform, I was a sergeant in uniform as well. I've been working in Criminal Investigations Bureau, Investigative Services, the the Intimate Partner Violence Unit, and then we came into contact during my time working in the training branch. Sorry, that's very long-winded.
No, that's fascinating to hear, and I think it's so cool that the background that set you up, I think, to be an excellent officer. I mean, I think there is no. I remember few years back, the former chief Eric Shalif we were at a community safety meeting, and he was saying he was really an advocate for an actual degree in policing. He said, "Listen, if you're going to be a nurse, you go to school 4 or 5 years, right, or more, depending on the kind of nursing you want to get into. Any profession," he said, "except for policing, right? It could be really any degree or not, or." And he was really pushing for it because they want individuals with a skill set that you're bringing in, right? That really understands that kind of subset of the community. So I think that's fascinating, very cool to hear. It makes a lot of sense from what I know of you. Um, Listen, I have to say that the York Regional Police, I've had the great fortune of working alongside, are truly a community policing force up in New York region that just go out of their way, are at every community event, are always open to learning and changing, dialing in. And it kind of brings us to our conversation today around the partnership that has happened. I think probably maybe about 10 years ago, there was a group of partners that are all emergency housing providers. And the police sat down. And really, what led you to that was the fact that, despite everyone's best efforts, there are at times when you're dealing with vulnerable populations where you need to call the police, or when somebody's missing and the police go, one of the first stops they might make is that emergency housing provider, because that's where someone might be staying, so their families can find them, etc. So there's lots of interaction points, and sometimes there might be confusion on the end of the police or the service provider, and that might lead to some misunderstandings or conflict. And I think in an effort to really, work through that, and I'm kind of taking away your thunder, but this is where you came together and you did something really special. Alex, you've got a long history with this, with Blue Door, one of the original groups involved. Can you talk a little bit about that history and how it came to be?
Yeah, no, I have a little bit of a background. I think when I first started, I think that some of the meetings had already been taking place, and the initial iteration was almost at the finish line. But as you mentioned, I mean, the last iteration of the MOU was signed in 2014, and it was a good solid 3 years of work that led to that initial document. I think now you mentioned a little bit about the background, and yes, it was centered around mostly shelter providers at that point coming together along with the YRP to look at different circumstances that may that due to the nature of our work we interact together. I mean, we work really closely and we partner really closely with the York Regional Police. I mean, our staff teams come to depend on their support and partnership to ensure that the safety of the clients that we serve. I think the intention of the initial MOU was really it was really a result of identifying the need to establish a framework that guided our interactions. Sometimes there would be, I guess, conflict, or whether it was perceived or real, between the thought of privacy and confidentiality of the clients that we serve, that the homelessness sector and the violence against women sector, for example, and the requests that we made to law enforcement and vice versa. Now, as a bit of an example, we without getting into too much detail, for example, from the shelter's perspective, sometimes we would get real-time requests from officers to identify whether a person was staying with us or not, right? And I say that, I mean, most most listeners are probably going to wonder, well, that's not that big of a deal. But in this example, it's actually quite nuanced. There are many factors involved with us being able to decide, when or how to share information. So, having these discussions jointly together as a group of shelter providers with the YRP, it allowed us to better understand the different scenarios and the different perspectives that we each had as to how, when, why information is requested from their end, for example, and the YRP's end, and conversely, how information is ultimately shared and in some cases withheld from the perspective of both, housing providers and law enforcement. So, I mean, there were a lot of other scenarios that's just one particular example, but we're able to define clear processes around at that time missing persons, for example, and at that time that work was mostly focused on the delicate work of the VAW sector, and where women flee intimate violence, and there's I guess an added need in ensuring the privacy and confidentiality of their location is really handled with care, right? As I mentioned before, I mean, it was signed in 2014, but 2014, 2024, that's 10 years, and a lot has changed in 10 years. And when yourself, Tom, and I started talking about looking at revising at the MOU and opening it up, we realized that a lot has changed, processes, legislation. So I think we all agree that it was in need of an update for sure.
Well, even alongside that, I think, and this is when, and Tom, please weigh in. You were new to this. I don't even know. Were you aware of this? And because sometimes what happens, despite our best intentions, we have this document where we train people as new officers, as new social service staff join the teams. It gets put on the shelf. If people forget, you say, "How about that MOU?" And people don't know what you're talking about. Were you familiar with it before we started chatting, or?
I recall the document from my time working in the Intimate Partner Violence Unit, but if I'm being completely honest with you, I never actually read it. And from my perspective, having the opportunity to have you, Michael, and your colleague attend for this training that I was putting on our side of things, you would come and provide an hour and a half of your time to help educate our investigators on what you do and what is going on in our community, giving us some insight. And after you would leave, I would start hearing officers who, like, I felt clearly still didn't understand what's really going on, and why. Alex just touched on it. Why certain decisions are made. Why information sometimes isn't provided. They didn't understand the perspective of the individuals that work in your silo, and that's where I go back to this word silos a lot. I think what was happening is we had this document, it'd been shelved, no one had really looked at it, it had lost traction. We were building walls or silos, and we weren't really communicating very well. And a lot of times, I know I mentioned it briefly about my draw into policing and the myths involved. There was myths on both sides. What are police doing? What are they up to? And what are these folks doing in the shelters, drop-in centers? Why aren't they sharing information? And to me, it was the perfect time for us to sit down again and start opening up the lines of communication. Once we start communicating, we start breaking down some of these silos. I think it benefits everybody.
Yeah, well said, well said. And I think any document that you do is really only as good as the people that are delivering it, right? So this is going to take a lot of, hey, let's do training, and annually, how do we refresh this to make sure new staff that come on board, we onboard them on so they know new officers coming through, or new staff or new leaders in the sector. I think it is really special because we do interact a lot. And a whole community includes everyone in a community, including your most vulnerable. And this just really provides staff and officers and police with real guides. And as you said, Tom, an understanding of each other. This is why we might want this, and this is why we may not be able to do that. And here's where we can meet in the middle and decide what we're going to do going through. As you went through this process, I know it's been a long process and many partners involved. Alex, you talked about how the partners involved changed a little bit this time. It went a little bit beyond emergency housing providers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely, Michael. I mean, I think part of it was building on that good work that was done 10 years ago, right? In this iteration, the partnership has broadened. I mean, initially it was just shelter providers. So for us here in York Region, that means us Blue Door, Salvation Army, 360 Kids, and the VAW sector, Yellow Brick, Sandgate, and ETA Vaughan. But as time has gone on, I think we've realized as we started having this conversation as well and started engaging other folks that were not necessarily housing providers too, they came back with interesting feedback. I think the feedback that we were getting was, well, you may be onto something here. You may have something useful that may be useful to us too. So how do we get involved, and how do we tweak that language or add some language in this MOU so that it kind of covers our interactions with officers as well, and it allows our staff to really be able to understand current legislation processes and open up that line of communication better. So this time around, we've added seasonal shelters to the mix. So last time it was only emergency housing providers and VAW. So we've added the In from the Cold in Newmarket. We've added our own Mosaic Out of the Cold program, which which is a program of Blue Door now, but we had a merger just about 3 years ago. We've added the Craftsman Center. Tom mentioned drop-ins that Craftsman runs an excellent drop-in, and they're a consumer survivor initiative here in York Region, running peer support services. And when they heard that we had this document in place, they were like, "Wow, again, this applies to us too, because we have officers, calling or accessing our drop-in, and sometimes we don't know what to do, for example." And we also have had the John Howard Society join us this time around too. So I think. A lot of our good work is being built on and is iterative. And I think as more people find out, how useful it is to have clear language and to have these processes set up, I think more people might want to join as well, and see how they can take advantage of this too.
Were there, let's talk a little bit about were there challenges along the way? I mean, when you have multiple partners involved and it's going to make sense for everyone, um, maybe Tom, start with you, and Alex, can you talk about some of the challenges or pieces you just needed to work through?
I think internally for us, and perhaps even Alex can recall even some of our initial meetings when we sat down together as a working group. I think it's, again, from my side of things, it's humanizing the police and understanding that we are public servants just like you are. We're all compassionate people at this table. We're all professionals, and we're all looking to work together to better serve the community. It's just erasing those myths, I think, and really understanding what we do as police beyond just the enforcement side of things. And then vice versa for and the policing side of things, again, that's it's building this trusting relationship and understanding what you folks are up to and why we're all on the same team here. That's really been the only kind of bump in the road, but I think we've really addressed it. Alex, kudos to Alex. Alex led the way here, getting this document together. It's fantastic. But there were only really small, kind of tiny bumps in the road, and from my perspective, at least.
Yeah, Michael. I think from my perspective, I think the initial response when we when we had all the partners together, I think was overwhelmingly positive. I think we all realized that we had something, and that something to build on, and this is really around building partnership as well. I mean, all of us, and I echo what Tom said earlier. We all have our own priorities in terms of how we serve, how we the processes that we have as well, and sometimes sometimes that can lead to siloing ourselves, not really by intention, right? But when we all came together, I think we all realized, there is some common ground. I think from the MOU's perspective, so much time has passed that we had learned so many lessons that we wanted to apply this round as well. And yes, I echo Tom's source again. A lot has to do around understanding, the work of supporting individuals through a social service lens, through a lens of enforcement. How are we able to demystify, destigmatize our positions as well? So, I don't necessarily think that there are major challenges. I think the challenge is always, bringing people together and ensure that every voice is heard, and that when you put it together on a document, right, that all of the needs and are captured appropriately, right, and that we have something that we're going to be able to continuously build on. So I think all the partners were really wonderful and open-minded to work with, and I think we were all on the same page that we wanted to get this done.
Well, kudos to both of you, because I know you sent that out for signature, and I thought, well, this will take a while, and it came back fairly quick. Now, mind you, in the last 10 years, we now have something called DocuSign, which makes it a heck of a lot easier than one person signing and printing and faxing and just scanning and doing all that kind of stuff. But it is brilliant and really something you should be proud of. Just on a high level, can you talk about, maybe give some examples of something that would be covered in the MOU that would kind of simplify things? Alex, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll start off, and then maybe Tom, if you want to get into some specifics at a high level, at a very high level. Obviously, we've updated the language to reflect current times, and a lot of it had to do with legislation, right? Some of it was clarification around language of missing persons, and Tom can speak to that a lot better than I can. But we also have new tools as a community to account for that didn't exist 10 years ago. So now we have the European centralized intake line for people experiencing homelessness, and that's a one-stop shop where if someone is in need of shelter space, that's what they call first, right? So how do we use this tool to be more transparent, be able to make these processes more efficient? For example, we've also added some language and some clarity around mental health emergencies and human trafficking. And the human trafficking piece, if you recall, Michael, circa 2014, I think that was the time when we started doing a bit more work on human trafficking. I think if you're going back to the time when the idea of this MOU came to be in 2010, 2011, uh, that work was just getting started. There wasn't very much on the ground, but between 2010 and 2014, a lot had been developed and wasn't really captured through the initial document, and a lot more has been developed since, right? So it was really important for us to go back and to make that addition. Tom, I don't know if you have much more to add in terms of details.
I would echo what you said, Alex, and I think just really for me the home run piece here is that improved communication through the intake system. I think that that's going to really make things much more efficient, and it's going to really eliminate any in which we rarely had was any conflict. But I think the improved communication, I think, is hands down the best thing that's coming out of this. And like you said, we did have some legislative changes in the last 10 years, of course, and some nuances here and there. But I would say that that's the real selling piece for me, is the improved communication. And then I think to cut in kind of to what's next for us, I would say doing some joint training together and really dispelling. I know I've said this a number of times, but dispelling these myths and breaking down these silos and getting us communicating in a better fashion, which won't take much because I think we do really have an excellent relationship. There's just obviously it's becoming, especially for us as police, we always have to work on being more transparent, in my opinion. So if we can take down some of the barriers there, and hopefully people have a better understanding of what we do and why we do it, I think it'll improve our relationships even more.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, this MOU is really a reflection of our partnership. The partnership's always been there. It's just getting stronger, right? And we've had so many lessons learned through that first iteration that we know, as Michael alluded to it earlier, when you have a piece of document, it could go on the shelf and it could gather dust for a few years. And when you have so many people involved, how do you make sure that you all have the same interpretation of that document? So we've learned from the last iteration and what wasn't done, which was being able to kind of keep that document alive and make sure that we had some tools in place with the document and some processes in place to make sure that all of our staff teams are up to date, and that that there are platforms and avenues that we can get together periodically to look at. These are some of the things that are gray areas, or they're not really. Maybe they need a little bit better clarification, or as you said, Tom, from the very start, destigmatizing work, right? How do we generate some of this video content so that we can share with our staff teams, so that the YRTP officers know if they come to a housing provider, why are they talking about is this are you here on active pursuit? Do you have a warrant? And for our staff, for example, understanding, well, you're not going to see it physically in most cases, perhaps, these are the guidelines that we have for you to operate within, right? And these are the reasons why we've come to this place and we've agreed to this language and this process, right?
Both well said. I think, I heard clarity, and it's things like, listen, listeners, when sometimes when someone's missing, that family is desperately looking for and wants to support an individual who may not know, or through various for various different reasons. And one of the places they're going to start is looking at places where they would be housed, meaning emergency services like shelters, and they call in. And this just really gives the clarity of a new staff member saying, okay, what should I do when I get this call? And for officers to say, what can I expect when I make this call? And that kind of thing. It makes things, it simplifies things, it makes it easier. And at the end of the day, it's better for all the individuals involved, right? Especially the clients and the people that, and it just makes things even better. I think it's a great document. And yes, every few years you've got to kind of take another look at it, look at changes like you have now. And the training piece, as Tom mentioned too, is going to be big too. You could design this, but if people don't know and are not familiar with it, you really want to, every new person that comes in, you want them to be familiar with this document and have it as a resource. It's like, that's so great. You just made this so much easier. It's wonderful. And I said right from the beginning, for my 14 years in this region, York Regional Police have always done things a little different. Alex, you mentioned human trafficking. I was so unaware and uneducated in 2014 when Tai Trong, who is now the chief of police in London, sat me down, and he was much more kinder than I'm going to say now, but he really said, you need to do your job. They were doing the policing part of things. Of course, the arresting of people involved in illegal activities, but the victims of this, the survivors, they needed help. And she said, we're not social workers, but we care about these kids. And to me, that said so much about the force that we were working with. And I learned so much. And at the time, 360 Kids, who still does the Hope program, working with YRP, with survivors coming out of human trafficking. So a great relationship. I mean, a couple of weeks back, we even had a York Regional Police hockey team, and Hockey Helps the Homeless, with the chief leading the way. Listen, they were really good too. I think they won the whole thing. So very, very heavily involved. They're involved in the coldest night of the year. They help Yellow Brick House, Women Fleeing Violence Association with their Walk a Mile in My Shoes. Every charitable event helping vulnerable people, you will see York Regional Police present at and always at the tables around the region, trying to understand and learn and grow and share that with their team, which should be commended. You should be commended, both of you. Thank you for your leadership on this. If there was a community that said, we'd love to work on a memorandum of understanding with all the partners in our police force, who could they reach out to? Alex, is that you? Could you link them to Tom, or both of you?
Definitely, I think I think I'm on board. We're happy to share the work that we've done. Not wanting to speak for Tom, but I'm sure that he'd be on board as well.
Absolutely. Any chance to work with Alex again and any other community partners across Canada, or I'm more than happy to be there.
Yeah, and listen, folks, save yourself a lot of work. I mean, this was in 2014 when Alex was talking about 2030. It took a couple of years originally put the original document together. There was a lot to work through, and now that there's a base there, and then this renewed document that is willing to be shared, you have a starting point that I'm sure you could tweak to your own community's needs. But reach out to Alex. You could just visit. You can find his information at bluedoor.ca, and he can link you to York Regional Police and to Tom and the team as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this. I think at the end of the day, you both are responsible for making our communities safer and supportive, and it's so appreciated.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank
All
you
right,
very much
guys.
for having me.
Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time on the way home.